So the days clicked by. But Myra was gone. Just gone. When it rained outside, I lay there hoping she was warm wherever she was, or if her body was out there, that it was protected from the elements. Although they were never able to find Myra King, since she vanished on that day in 1993, they'd pieced together enough evidence. The Orange County District Attorney filed murder charges against Raymond Frost in November of 1997. Raymond's trial lasted till March of 1998, when he was ultimately convicted by a jury of his peers. The jury had been meticulous in its deliberations and went over the evidence very carefully. In this case, that was so unusual because the victim's body had never been found.
What's up, you beautiful beasts? I'm Katie. I'm on a mission to help humans become their favorite versions of themselves and to strive for overall health by healing their relationship to food and exercise, healing their relationship to their body, and most importantly, healing their relationship to themselves, all without ever having to step on a scale. I have had the privilege to talk to all kinds of different humans who have been through a plethora of experiences just being a human and existing. I believe that every single time someone shares their story, at least one person listening will learn from it, be inspired by it, and maybe, just maybe, even change the entire direction of their life. These are the stories of humans unveiling their beautiful beast. Keep listening. This is the Unveiling the Beast podcast. So we're back for part 4 of part 2. Inside joke, because I've tried to start this particular episode 4 times now. And I think what is making me lag my words or drag my words, however you want to say it, is that I don't often talk about how when I was 7 years old, my dance teacher was murdered by her son. And I'm now that I'm speaking it out loud, I feel like that's what's making me hesitate to start the episode, because I don't talk about it. I don't remember it vividly, but I also, it's not that I don't think about it, because that's part of my past. And my version of the story, and listeners, she's going to tell a much longer detailed version. But my version of the story is I had a dance teacher. I was taking hip hop dance when I was 7 with Megan. If you haven't listened to her episode, I'll post both her episodes in the show notes. And one day she didn't show up. And all I remember is somebody telling me there's no dance class today. And I remember you and running around like nut jobs. Although I don't think that was in my vocabulary back then, but nut balls, I'll stay with.
And you could tell we were worried, right?
And I knew something was wrong. And we never saw her again. And then after we moved up to Moorpark, California, I think it was 5 years later, her son was convicted of murder without ever finding her body. And so that's like the gist of my memory, just knowing that A, my dance teacher didn't show up, B, something was terribly wrong, C, her own son took her life and they never found her body. So with all of that said, I'm going to pass the torch and the microphone to Rosemary Moffat, who her episode was a few days ago. First episode talking about being the spouse of a stroke victim and how that all played out. Because we have a lot of stories, like you were just saying. You're old and I'm old, and we have stories. And that's
Yeah.
the whole point of this podcast. And yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that. And like I said in the beginning, I don't talk about this. You don't just, you know, say, "Oh, hey, by the way, when I was 7, my dance teacher was murdered." You just don't. So I'm going to pass the torch to you.
All
Cheers.
right.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Unveiling the Beast podcast, Rosemary Moffat.
Hello, everyone. In preparing for this particular podcast, I went over my story. I'm a writer as well as many other things. And last year, I really felt that I needed to get Myra's story down. And at the same time, it was like every time my fingers hit the keypad, it was horrific because I didn't want to revisit it. But it's a story that needs to be told because they never found her, because she was a great friend and wonderful woman. Anyway, so I finally got it done in December of last year. And I'll wait till the end of the story to tell you what happened after that. But sometimes we need to be brave. We need to tell these stories that we don't want to tell. We need to let people know that things like this could happen in their life. Hopefully not. And also that they can make a difference in the world in some way. And it's good when you speak up, even if you're afraid to. So without further ado, I'm going to start the story. Okay. Losing Myra. Every week, Monday through Friday, Myra King walked through the doors of the after-school center at precisely 1 p.m. I sometimes saw her from my office window, strolling gracefully down the little side street on the cracked and somewhat weedy sidewalk, past the 1950s tract homes and apartments, and past the Old Women's Club. She'd walk under our bright red awning and through the double doors of the Children's Center, always with a gentle smile on her beautiful ebony face. Myra would always nod to the front office staff and head to the dance room, where she'd immediately be surrounded by excited children. It was now July 1993, stunning and warm, as were most summer days in this beautiful California beach town. But this day, it was 1:35, and she hadn't walked through those doors. I will never forget the first time I talked to Myra. She called me inquiring if we might meet and talk about a new program for our kids. And as a program director for a national informal educational center for youth, I was hesitant. I got so many calls, which usually led to a sales pitch for something or other that I didn't want for my children. But something about this woman's voice, her directness, her phone demeanor, something that was real, made me set an appointment for the next day. We didn't know what to expect, and we truly didn't expect what we received when Myra swept into our executive director's office. She was tall and elegant and well-dressed, wearing a beautiful jade scarab on a gold chain around her neck. That scarab became important to me later. Myra never took it off. It was a part of who she was. She sat, we sat, and as I remember, she told us she was an experienced dance teacher and choreographer, and she wanted to start a program for our children that included dance and life skills. Oh, it sounded good. She would start as a volunteer, and if it worked out, we could consider making her an employee. I thought to myself, why would someone with credentials like hers want to work here? But there was a sadness. There was a sadness and a searching in her that really came through, despite her directness and despite her professionalism. Myra was a storied woman. She'd been through things that made it important for her to be here. So we agreed, and Myra rented a small apartment a few blocks from the center because she had no car. She walked to work. Throughout the months that followed, everyone realized that Myra was someone exceedingly extraordinary. She taught teamwork and confidence and responsibility, all wrapped up in the beauty and the joy of dance. She was kind and gracious and funny and professional. She pushed her students to work diligently and made them love it. The children adored her. The parents respected her. The employees treasured her. She lived what she taught, and we grew to count on seeing Myra's smiling face walking through those front doors at 1 p.m. sharp. As a teacher, Myra was open and loving and playful and disciplined with her students. But as a staff member, she was a very private person. And throughout that early time, she retained that air of sadness. But slowly, ever so slowly, ever so carefully, in bits and pieces, she became comfortable enough with a few of us to tell her story. Myra and I, we'd become friends, and at some point, she revealed to me and two others the truth about why she was there and who and where and what her son was. You see, Myra had a son named Raymond Frost. And the last name Frost was a perfect one for Raymond. For Raymond was a diagnosed sociopath. Up to this time, I'd never really heard the term sociopath, so I immediately went into research mode, and I found that as children, sociopaths may begin acting out. They may start drawing pictures of murder weapons or pretending to kill their stuffed animals. They might pinch or trip or push their siblings and smile when their siblings cried. They have no trouble hurting others to get what they want. And the dangerous part is that they also tend to be charming and intelligent. But if they do seem caring or empathetic towards someone, they're probably trying to manipulate them to get their own way. And even at an early age, this behavior isn't impulsive. It's very thoughtful and premeditated. Wow. So as with other parents of these children, Myra consulted doctors and psychiatrists and therapists. One psychologist assured her that the problem was merely delayed empathy, and another one said that Raymond was impulsive, something that medication would fix, and yet another suggested he had reactive attachment disorder, which could be ameliorated with intensive therapy, whatever that means. And predictably, in these sorts of cases, another psychologist blamed Myra, implying that Raymond was reacting to severe and unloving parenting. And that was a ridiculous assumption for all who knew her. But therapy didn't work. Nothing seemed to be effective. Not affection, not discipline, nothing. Doctors kept dismissing the one condition that did seem to fit because it was a diagnosis that all the medical health professionals considered rare and untreatable. At the time, they called children like Raymond callous and unemotional. Callous and unemotional children. But with each passing year, both nature and nurture conspired to block a callous child's exit to a normal life and steered them toward what they called sociopathy. Big words. By some estimates, 4 out of 5 children with these traits do not grow up to be sociopaths or psychopaths. And since at that time, the doctors said that the rational part of Raymond's brain was still under construction, and even in his teenage years, it was still under construction, Myra thought, well, maybe he may not be a lost cause. Raymond was growing up to be a tall, dark, intelligent, exceedingly handsome young man, charming, with a smile that could melt the hearts of many women and some men. And after all, Raymond didn't grow up wanting to be a sociopath. He grew up wanting to be a famous musician or a great football star. But it wasn't a choice. Not for a sociopath. He was smart enough for college, but he couldn't negotiate that complex society in colleges without becoming a threat. And he couldn't keep a stable romantic relationship for the same reason. And as time passed, Raymond became one scary dude. The true challenge was that his extremes were so extreme, and his mood and his behavior could quickly turn at any time. And Myra found herself constantly redefining success for Raymond, simply to keep herself safe and to keep him out of prison. And she was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. So, despite all of Raymond's seemingly positive attributes, he was ultimately diagnosed a sociopath in 1992 at 18 years of age. As Myra told us her story, the look on her face told us she was facing a spiritual crisis. Mothers love their sons. They love them unconditionally. But ever since Ray had been strong enough to do so, he had beaten and abused his mother mercilessly when he didn't get his way. The last time he'd beaten her so badly, she was hospitalized for a long stretch with a broken jaw, fractured ribs, and horrific cuts and bruises. Raymond had been convicted of parental abuse and was now in prison. Myra admitted that despite what Raymond had done to her, she missed him terribly. She still remembered the deeply intricate love of breastfeeding her only son as a baby, the joy of his first words as a young child, taking him to the bus stop on his first day of school, his delightful laugh. But in the next breath, she told us he was getting out of prison in 3 weeks and he wanted to come home. She had told him when he went in that he'd need to find his own place when and if he got out. But now, she didn't know what to do. None of us were expecting that story. And we all sat in this shocked silence to think that this beautiful, magnificent woman had endured being beaten by the one she loved the most was just horrifying. And we all threw our arms around her and we all cried together, knowing that we had to try to keep her safe. We were so afraid for Myra. So we did some research and we asked a lot of questions and we got a lot of tough answers. Our center had a wonderful part-time counselor who gave us lots of resources. She told us that the time for training Raymond against emotional and physical abuse was way past. She said the time for grounding him or taking away the things that he values was certainly over. And all the professionals we spoke to insisted that she must follow through and actually give the consequence of not coming home. No matter how he argued or tried to threaten his way into it, she needed to be strong, stick to her plan, and not give an inch. And that even when he visited her, to do so in a public space with a trusted friend or family member right by her side. They all said that from their experience, the cycle of violence he brought into her home was a cycle that he would follow again. Once he was in, he would slowly bring her ever more under his control with emotional and physical abuse. And if she didn't follow through by keeping him out, his behavior would likely get worse than it was before. Tough love was definitely required here. So we passed all of this on to Myra. We told her we loved her and wanted to help her stay safe. We asked her to listen to the professionals, the families who'd been through this, her family members, friends, and us, her coworkers. We told her he would never play fair in his efforts to get his way. And Myra knew we were right. She knew. But she was just not strong enough, not well enough. She'd lived this life with a sociopathic son for too long. And it was all she knew. So 3 weeks later, Raymond was sprung out of prison, and he moved back in with Mom. And we were all mortified. Then Raymond started showing up at the Children's Center. Just walked right in. He bypassed the front office staff with a smile and a wink and a couple of compliments. And I'd go out onto the main playground and find him laughing with the children and charming the staff. He asked me for a job 3 times, and I'd always smile and turn him down. It only took a week to finally firmly tell him to stop dropping by. I conjured up this excuse that our insurance wouldn't cover any injuries he might incur while there because I couldn't tell the truth. I couldn't tell him the truth. It was just too dangerous. The children and many of the staff just loved who they thought he was. And they couldn't understand why that I had essentially barred him from the center. But I knew who Raymond was and what he'd done to his mother. I didn't want him anywhere near our children, or anywhere near Myra for that matter. So, on that sunny July day, 2 years later, 2 years after I'd met Myra, when it was 1:35 p.m. and she hadn't walked through the doors, I knew something was gravely wrong. She was always there by then, rain or shine, and always. Besides, she had a field trip scheduled for that day, and missing it was out of character for her. And not calling in if something came up was unthinkable for her. And that was when my spine chilled, and my stomach dropped, and my mouth went dry, just like it's doing right now. I called the police. And I expected them to say that they had to wait 24 hours before acting, but when the police came to the center to get more information, they'd already been to her apartment. Her son was there. Her purse was there, but Myra was not. And Raymond told the police that he saw his mother about 9 p.m. the night before. He said she left home without saying where she was going. He said she was wearing blue denim pants and a brown jacket dress. But I ask you, what woman leaves the house to go somewhere and doesn't take her purse? And besides the purse, there were other potential evidence pieces that the police would not divulge. And they arrested him that very day on another charge, just to get him off the streets for a while. I guess they already knew Raymond. They needed to gather clues, and they needed time. So the days clicked by. But Myra was gone. Just gone. There was a dismal coolness running through the center, and the center's 200 plus children wanted answers. Their parents wanted answers, and we, her friends and co-workers, had fallen into this void of not knowing what to tell them. The emotional impact was excruciating. We brought in counselors to assist with our strange grief, because some of the children thought it was their fault that Myra didn't like them anymore, and some were angry with her for not showing up and for making them feel the way they did. And some just couldn't understand the concept of someone disappearing. It just didn't make sense to a child. Some were angry at her. Some staff were angry. We finally had to tell them about Raymond. So at that time, we all lived in a limbo of not knowing. And we couldn't move on. I mean, we fluctuated between hope and hopelessness. And as the program director there, I tried to be calm and strong and philosophical and imply to others that this just must be some kind of misunderstanding. There must be a logical explanation that things like this just didn't happen to people like Myra. But all that time, deep down, I knew that something was terribly wrong. And let me tell you, it was terrifying. I just can't really put into words what this terrifying feeling was like. It was murky and looming. It was a constant floating darkness, an ongoing horror of not knowing. It was a continual loss. I couldn't sleep. And although I knew that to the outside world, it looked like I was coping, I felt like I couldn't function normally. And every night, I'd lay in bed and search through the coffers of my grieving mind for where she might be. Was she dancing on Broadway without a care in the world about how we might be suffering? No. Was she mortally injured and unable to get up? Was she scared and hopeless and unstrung? Was she dead? When it rained outside, I lay there hoping she was warm wherever she was, or if her body was out there, that it was protected from the elements. And then, almost immediately after Myra's disappearance, I began to see these beautiful iridescent blue-green beetles everywhere. I kid you not. They'd land on my windshield, on my arm, on the playground equipment, in the park across the street, on the picnic tables. These lovely, beautiful beetles were not normally seen in our part of California. They were scarab beetles, just like the jade scarab that Myra had worn around her neck every day. I became convinced that Myra was out there somehow trying to tell us something. So I searched for her everywhere, in my mind and on the streets. And for a while, I actually kept a blanket and a flashlight in my car just in case. You do strange things with a grief like this because it's never ending. That something never materialized. There was no resolution. There was to be no closure to enable any of us to move on. Yet we persisted, holding on to hope. We had to hold on to hope. The hope of a happy reunion, or after a while, even simply just learning what had happened and why she went missing in the first place. Why did we have to hold on to hope? Well, I'll tell you why. We needed to hold on to hope because we needed to do something, know something, hope something to keep from totally plummeting into that murky void that followed us around every single day since Myra vanished. We needed for Myra's disappearance to have some meaning. We needed to hang on to something. Because to merely declare, oh, she's dead, she's gone, nothing we can do about it, that's the end of the story, that was not acceptable. The story had to continue somewhere. And we needed that part of the story, that blank part of the story, to at least have some sort of worth. The dark mystery of it all had created a different kind of grief, which they tell me when I researched it later, many years later, they tell me it's called ambiguous loss. And it's difficult to ever reconcile. Those of us at the center who had called and collaborated with the police eventually realized that Raymond knew we had given them the information regarding him, and that the information that led to his arrest. And we knew that if he was out for any length of time, he knew where to find us. Fearing that kind of revenge that someone like Raymond would feel due to him, we requested that we be contacted when he was released on bail. We feared it, but police did not understand what he was, and they let him out on bail within a few weeks without so much as a phone call. So the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, and we never knew when Raymond was in or out, as the police were quite closed-mouthed, maybe rightfully so, but the ambiance at the center was never quite the same. My nighttime searches continued in my head, but less frequently, and I still chased after people in the street, in the market, sitting in the subway station, after women that looked like Myra. But eventually I had to realize that none of them would be her. And after a while, the scarabs no longer made their appearances. In 1994, I left the center and moved to Ventura County with my children. I still called the police asking for updates every year or so. And I also got a couple of calls from friends warning me when they knew that Raymond was out. My family and others moved forward in life. And when I say move forward, it was haltingly for a long time. And we took Myra's memory with us, each in our own ways. And my children grew tall and strong, and life kept me more than busy. And then, in 1998, I got news that I guess I'd been waiting for unconsciously, without realizing it. The police wouldn't say what led to the break in the case. However, although they were never able to find Myra King, since she vanished on that day in 1993, they'd pieced together enough evidence. The Orange County District Attorney filed murder charges against Raymond Frost in November of 1997. In my research, I was able, because we had internet now, to look back at newspaper articles. And the newspapers had disclosed that a person had reported to them that her late brother was Myra's boyfriend at the time, and that he happened to be at her home on the night in question. Her son had started to argue with her about something, and he wouldn't let it go. And the boyfriend just left. He left the apartment thinking they'd work it through. And the sister of that man, Myra's boyfriend, was convinced that Myra was murdered by her son that night. And she was also convinced that due to her brother's guilt of leaving her there that night, his health declined rapidly, and within weeks he died of a heart attack. Neighbors had told reporters that they heard thumps coming from Myra's apartment the night before she disappeared. And they also testified they heard a woman screaming for help, and later a male's voice saying, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Authorities declined to comment on any of the other evidence gathered in the case, but nobody called the police that night. Nobody. And Myra was never seen or heard from again. When it went to trial, the prosecutor conceded that it had been some time since they had a case like this, and that the absence of a body might make it more skeptical for jurors. But they were firm in saying that there were distinct types of evidence that could be used to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And although Raymond Anthony Frost had been somewhat elusive over the past few years, they finally located him late one night in Los Angeles at the wheel of a stolen car along with a loaded .38 caliber handgun and a box of rock cocaine. He was arrested without incident that night. Raymond's trial lasted till March of 1998, when he was ultimately convicted by a jury of his peers. The deputy public defender criticized the jury's decision, saying jurors would have had wrongly speculated about the night of King's disappearance to convict Frost, blah, 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 blah. But the jury had been meticulous in its deliberations and went over the evidence very carefully. In this case, that was so unusual because the victim's body had never been found. The sentence was 15 years to life and would be somewhat dependent on whether Raymond divulged where he'd hidden his mother's body. The prosecutor insisted that Raymond would not and should not have the chance at parole until he revealed what he did with his mother. That until they found out, the family would continue to suffer and would have no closure. So, Myra's uncle, James King, who spoke for the family during that time, during the sentencing, he said, "I'd like to ask the defendant if he can find it in his heart to let us know where Myra is so we can give her a proper burial." But Raymond, he just stared impassively at his great uncle. He appeared to be about to speak, but quieted himself and just looked away. Up to that point, he'd continued to deny that he was responsible for Myra's death. And he stayed on his own twisted course in what seemed a final effort to possibly get his way. In his deluded mind, if people made him suffer, he would make damn sure that they suffered as well. He'd spend his entire life in prison, rather than give his family what they needed and pleaded for. Afterward, a despondent James King said he didn't expect his great-nephew to ever grant the family peace, but he just had to ask one final time. The hearts of sociopaths are difficult, if not impossible, to find. So in the end, ignoring the pleas from his relatives to divulge where he hid his mother's body, Raymond Frost was sentenced to life in prison for the 1993 murder of his mother. It was only the fourth murder case in Orange County history solved without a corpse as evidence. And Raymond was not present during the reading of the actual verdict. The papers had said that Myra's mother and father had emerged from the courtroom weeping, and both said it was an overwhelming sense of relief that had brought them to tears. Myra's mother and Raymond's grandmother said that Myra had loved her son very much. Raymond, however, did not always return his mother's affection. She said, quote, "It's been 4 long years. Since July 20th, 1993, I have known deep down that my daughter is dead and that it was by my grandson's hand," unquote. Frost's grandfather and namesake, Raymond A. King, hugged all the jurors and thanked them for the verdict. They were a beautiful family. He told them his grandson got the punishment he deserved and that Raymond was now where he needed to be. And although the verdict brought him a sense of relief, he also felt sorrow for his grandson. And he said, now his suffering will begin. Raymond Frost was remanded to a state prison in California and continues serving out his sentence to this date. The rest of us will serve our sentences out in the world, searching for closure to this day, 2024. We're still working to find peace. And let me tell you, it doesn't come easy. So, Katie, there's an aftermath to this story that I didn't expect. I finished this story in December of 2023, and I had looked up a site that dealt with lost people, missing people, and I'd met a couple of people who had also been affected by Raymond Frost. One of them texted me and said, "Oh my God, he's up for parole in May of 2024. And I thought, how can this man be up for parole? So I looked everything up, and it turned out he'd been up for parole quite a few times and never been released. But for some reason, they thought it might be a possibility this time. She was terrified. She'd had an extremely bad experience with the man. I'm 70 years old. I need to speak up, right? So I found the deputy district attorney who was dealing with the case. And I texted her. No, I emailed her. And I told her who I was and that I was the one that called the police that first day. And I told her how many people had suffered from Myra's loss and how wonderfully loved she was, and how her loss continues to have a huge impact on hundreds of people, young and old, and how we carried this misery and her memory with us forward in our lives. And I sent her the story with that email, and I asked for it to be read in the parole hearing. You know, I didn't expect to hear back from her at all. She emailed me back the next day. She said, "Thank you for this wonderfully written statement. With your permission, I will redact your name on each page and send it to the commissioners for their consideration. They really need to read it." And they did. And late May, I got another email from this woman. It said, "Raymond Frost was denied parole. Thank you. There are more people that would have been brave enough to reach out, but each person was terrified, and rightfully so. But I am appreciative to have partners like you in my endeavor to keep him where he belongs. So again, thank you." So that's the story, Katie. And you know the story, but I don't know if I read that story to you yet, but it's a bittersweet victory, this last thing. And I would do it again. And if they wanted me to, and if they want me to in the future, if I'm still alive, I will show up at the parole hearing for him.
And if you're not alive, I'll do it.
Yeah, good. Because it seems that they don't understand what a sociopath is, that they cannot change, that like a pedophile, there is no treatment for this. And so until they find treatment for something like this, he needs to be where he is. And I feel that us as a family going through this horrible time, first of all, I'm glad that you and your brother didn't understand it as deeply as the adults did, I don't think. And you mourned, but I don't think it affected you like the adults. I'm not sure. Maybe you can tell me. But I'm glad that you didn't know the whole story, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we were able to move ahead, and we've had a pretty darn good life, because things like that either destroy you or they make you more compassionate and strong and willing to step out of your comfort zone. So there you have it.
It's so weird. I'm so emotional right now because I've read the story, but I've never heard you read it to me.
Yeah.
And like hearing it in its entirety from your voice. Well, you know the work I do.
Mhm.
I take people back through their lives to see where stuff came from and why they think and have beliefs and do the things they do. And oh my gosh, look how emotional I am.
I
Um,
know. I warned you. I
I
not
know.
directly, but we went through some crazy shit. Let me tell you, and not it's very rare for people to go through a situation like this where you lose someone to murder and they never find the body. You never
Yeah.
get closure. You never get closure. I'm here to tell you right now, the word getting closure is overused because in situations like this and many others, you never get it. And you have to learn how to make that awful, life-changing experience. You have to push it into your soul and try to turn it into something good.
Yeah.
Not an easy job.
But
you know?
with what I was saying, like going back to the past, I have been I recently had a coaching session where I was the client and I talked about my abandonment issues, not ever from you, of course, but my abandonment issues and feeling like when I get close to people, they leave me. And hearing this story, I'm thinking in my head, like, not to make it about me or a selfish thing, but as a 7-year-old, this was the first time somebody left me and never came back. Woo!
And believe me, that is a part of the abandonment issue thing. There's all sorts of ways that you can develop this abandonment. I don't know. I call it because I have it too. I
Yeah.
have it too.
Yeah, but you
And
also had this series of shitty boyfriends, just to put that
yes,
out there.
and maybe,
Sorry.
this whole abandonment thing, sometimes I think we pick the people who unconsciously we know that they're not available. We pick them anyways because it's what we know.
Yeah.
Just as Myra let her son come home because she loved him and his sickness was what she knew.
Yeah.
It's a really strange thing. Um, and knowing that we have that, I think, is good because we can then fight it and know that it's not real most of the time and look for ways to find healthy relationships.
Yeah.
Death is one thing. Some people abandon us because they die,
Right.
but not like that.
Yeah. And just to be like more blunt with my issues is that I've had to work through is, people leave, but it's never because of me. They disappear from my life, but it's never because of me. And
Right.
I had a lifetime of making it because I did something wrong.
Yeah.
And so it was a beautiful session. And it also reminded me that like there's not a lot of people that are going to be with us our entire life,
Mm-hmm.
and if you can embrace that, then when somebody does leave your life, it's okay.
Yeah.
Because, and this also goes back to, oh, I'm going to share this too. Because I've said this a lot, like we have to have our own backs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in the end, when you turn the corner, you're going to be the only one that's there with you. Like for sure. Like you don't know what else is out behind that corner. So I brought this up in this session, and my coach was like, when you say it like that, because we're always like dissecting each other's language. When we say it, I have my own back, it implies that there's danger. And so why not have your own heart? And
I
I was
like
like,
that.
asshole.
I like that.
Yeah. No, he's not really an asshole, but
You can say, I have my own heart, and therefore, when I need to, I have my own back.
yeah. But like all that
But
said, like this is what this story brought up for me, and it never clicked because I was so young. Like I was Desmond's age. My son is
yeah,
7.
yeah.
I was so young when this happened, and yet this is a memory that I'll never forget. And one of the things that chills my spine is like when he was coming around to, I played tetherball with him.
Yeah.
I
And
and it was fun. He was so nice, and I was like, "Oh, this is cool." I didn't know. I knew he was Myra's son. I didn't
that's all
know
you need.
anything else about him
Huh?
except, oh, some guy's playing tetherball with me. Cool. Is he going to be working here? Is he going to be like? That's what goes
Mm,
on in a 7-year-old's head.
yeah.
So, but now, like being as old and hairy as I am, like I played tetherball with a freaking murderer.
Yeah, you
Ugh.
did.
Ugh.
So so now being the age that you are and having your own son, there's a couple of things
Who's
I'd like to
7.
ask you. Imagine being, I mean, in my spot, I couldn't blab to the staff about who he was and what he did. I had been, there was only a few of us that knew, but I had to get him out of there. And also, and that was really tough because I was frightened. I was afraid of him,
Yeah.
even when she hadn't disappeared yet, because I knew about sociopaths then. But then on the other hand, I'm going to ask you, imagine, first of all, imagine having to do that, having to deal with that situation as an adult. You know, it's like going through this maze trying to figure out how to get rid of this person. And then when Myra disappeared, imagine having to tell your son about a favorite teacher of his that he'd never see again. It's like,
Yeah.
how do you do that? How do you do that?
And that kind of goes back to when Megan and I showed up for that dance lesson. I mean, there were other kids, but there was only like 5 or 6 of us, I think. And I remember, well, I'll finish that thought first. It goes back to that and saying there's no dance class today. And I knew something in me knew that it wasn't just this time that dance class wasn't going to happen. Um, but I wanted to expand that thought to we were learning a routine to Michael Jackson's Black or White. And so every time I hear that song, I think of her. We were actually
You
thinking of
know,
doing it in the band. But
I
yeah,
think
like every time I hear that song, I think of her because that's what we were learning.
something just hit me. Myra wanted to be there with the children in that center, doing what she did wonderfully. It was a happy place for her.
Yeah.
It was a reprieve for her. You know, she was happy being able to be with the children and teach them dance. And when I say she taught life skills, you know, she taught teamwork, she taught confidence, she taught all sorts of things besides dance. And she made the children work really hard and love it. And she loved being there, and she was always there because of that. So you as a 7-year-old, you probably just felt that somehow. So that's maybe why you knew that it meant not just that day she wasn't coming in. And I knew, I don't, going back to that first day, I just knew something horrible had happened because she loved being at the center.
Yeah.
We knew that. It was her place. It was, yeah. I still dream
And
about it. Yeah.
and you guys had matching bags. I remember that too. You guys had the
Did
same.
we? I don't remember that.
It's the one you called your upholstery bag because
Oh,
it looked like our couch.
oh, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
she
right.
had the same exact bag, and I only knew that because I started going through it once, thinking it was yours. Yeah,
Wow.
but I just remember how pretty she was
Yeah.
and how graceful she was, and I really wit. And it's interesting because like I have an image of her in my head, but I really wish I could see a picture of her.
I've been trying to find a picture.
Me
And
too.
have you?
I've been trying to find one.
If I find one, I'll share it with you. I found an image of someone that reminded me of her, and it's actually an Egyptian image. Did you see the image at all, though?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And the scarab is Egyptian. I actually have a scarab of my own now.
Mm.
Um, and I thought that I would wear it all the time, but I don't, because I realized I'm not Myra, but I have
Yeah.
it. You know. Anyways, that was really, really tough. And I
Yeah.
could see it's tough for you. And that's why we don't speak up about those things in our lives. We don't talk about it. We, just like you said in the beginning, because it's really hard and you want it to go away, and it never really
Yeah.
does. So
But
if we,
people associate hard and tough with bad, and it's
yeah,
not. It's not
no,
that. It just is.
it at this point, how many, 20, 93, 2003, God, 20 something years later, um, it's healthy to talk about it, and it's also healthy for other people to hear it, I think,
Yeah.
in some weird way, so
I
that they
just
can.
hope he doesn't. Like
Oh, I don't care.
that thought crossed my mind if he hears
No,
it and gets out of prison and then hunts us down and
no,
I
no.
know.
He's much older now, and that man will never get out of prison if I have anything to do with it. And if I can pass the torch to you, and I'll tell you where he is and all of that,
Okay.
I'll make sure that's in the trust. I
Okay.
mean it. So he will
Yeah.
never get out. If they read that story every time he's up for parole, Raymond Frost, you will never get out. You are where you belong. So if he sees this podcast, yeah. And that strength surpasses terror. That strength comes from, I want to say, God. So thank you for letting me share it.
Thank you for sharing it. Yeah. So we'll end it there. I mean, this isn't one of those. Yeah. Um, do you want to do the piece of advice thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask the question. At the end of every episode, as you well know, because you've been on twice already, I ask everyone the same question, and that is if you had one piece of advice that you could give to the world, what would it be?
I bet you know what I'm going to say, because I've been saying it throughout this whole thing, is speak up. If you have a story to share that people need to hear, regardless of how terrified you might be strong enough to speak up somehow, because it might save lives in the end. And that's, for right now, what I'm saying. Speak up. Okay?
Beautiful beasts, Rosemary Moffat, aka Mom, signing off. Until next time.